Hello, I'm Anthony. Welcome back to the Arturia Augmented Brass tutorial series. We're going to have our first of two looks at the layers today. We're going to deal with the sampler engine today and the synth engine in the next episode. Now, ordinarily, I like to use default presets wherever possible so that you can follow along with this stuff exactly. And pretty much I have. All I've done is created a slightly louder version of it. You can see I've boosted the main output a tiny bit because for demonstration purposes, the default template was a bit quiet, so if you see that, that's all it is. Without further ado, let's dive into the layers and figure out how all of this stuff works. And the first thing that I'm going to do is mute layer B entirely. So we're now down to one of the four parts. Remember that each of these sections is called parts, and we're dealing with part 1 and part 2 here, but part 2 is currently muted. So that's part 1 that you're hearing. It's layer A, part 1. This is a sampler sound. The sampler presets are divided into 4 subcategories, and if you click on the preset name where it says sustain loud, you can see those 4 sections. These 4 sections are then broken down into 2 different functional areas, and weirdly, areas 1 and 4 share common features, and areas 2 and 3 also share common features. Let's start off at the top and we'll have a look at additional samples. And I'm just going to double click where it says FM Electrics. So I've just loaded the FM Electrics sample into this part. Everything that you can see in this rectangle is currently displaying part 1 of layer A. It can be a little bit difficult to see which tab you're actually editing. You can see if I hover over part number 2, it highlights, it just gets slightly darker. You toggle between these different tabs by clicking where it says Sampler 2 Processed Brass. That's how you jump between the 2 parts. And as you can see, if you select a part that's currently muted, all of the controls are muted as well. But it is a little bit tricky to see which tab you're editing. I would like to see a little bit clearer delineation between these 2. Anyway, we're dealing with part 1 here, and all additional samples have this 3-shape icon. They also share a small common subset of features. The 3 controls that I'm currently circling with my mouse are common to all additional samples. And when I said there are 2 functional divisions at the primary level, all of these functions are also shared by the processed brass section as well. We'll have a look at that later. But let's just hear the sound for starters. As I press each of these notes, you can see it highlighting in the key zone. This key zone is the entire range of mapped samples. If you play a note outside of that zone, you're not going to hear the sound. So basically beyond C0, this FM Electrics sample library won't generate any sound. Now you can manipulate the keyboard, you can kind of cheat by adjusting the keyboard offset so that any particular key that you play may or may not play a sample. I'll show you how to do that before we go any further. It's in the tuning section. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play a C on the keyboard. There's a lot of debate as to whether or not I'm playing a C2 or a C3 here. The tuner tells me I'm playing a C3, but let's ignore the tuner because the interface tells me I'm playing a C2. So we'll just take that. It doesn't really matter what the bass line is as long as we agree that that's a C2. Now I'm going to tune this note up by 1 semitone. So I clicked on where it said 0 and dragged up with my mouse. Now I'm going to play the C again, and this time we play a C sharp. So tuning where it says coarse does exactly what you would expect it to. If you tune by a semitone, if you tune up by a semitone, it's going to play a note 1 semitone louder. Let's turn it back down to 0. This time I'll engage keyboard offset mode. Now I'm going to click on the 0 again and drag up with my mouse. But this time I immediately jump to 5, and did you see the keyboard range changed? This is how you artificially manipulate your keyboard zone. So I'm going to play the C again on my keyboard. And now I'm playing a note 5 semitones higher than that. What this means is that you can play a single note on the keyboard and for different instruments play different harmonic intervals. And the best way to demonstrate this is to bring in a second part. So let's re-engage part number 2. And now remember, part number 2 is still set at tuning 0. Doesn't matter whether it's coarse or keyboard offset. If this number's 0, they're doing the same job. Part number 1 now has a 5 semitone offset. So I'm going to play a single note on the keyboard. Now I'm playing a perfect 4th interval. So one note is playing C, one note is playing F, 5 semitones above. and that makes a perfect fourth. Like I'm in some 60s biblical epic here, ramming speed. Let's turn part 2 back off and bring me back down to 0 tuning, so everything is aligned back to C again. Let's have a look at these bespoke commands for the additional samples, and also they apply to the processed brass section as well. Random start is literally going to do that. Every time I press a note at the moment, they're all going to sound absolutely identical. It's playing the beginning of the sample every time. If I engage random start, and I'll maximize the effect to make it as dramatic as possible, it's going to pick a new point to start the sample from, and depending on the quality, the variant quality of the sample underneath, you're going to get subtle variations each time. You can quite clearly hear it's quite a stable kind of flat sound, and even so we're still getting different dynamics at the beginning of the note. Some of them softer than others. So that's a nice way to introduce some sort of randomness in your playing. You don't want a keyboard to sound like a keyboard, you want it to sound like a human being, and a little bit of random start is going to help you with that. Then we've got stereo width, a single control for stereo width in the additional samples library. So that's pan set to maximum. You can quite clearly hear different sound in each ear, as opposed to straight down the middle. Jump very quickly over to the processed brass section, just to prove that all of these have the same options. So you get a different icon to indicate this is the processed brass icon that you can see here. The 2 preset banks in the middle of these 4 options have a different set of characteristics. Now we don't have the random sample start. This time we have close and far microphones, and we have a mix knob to control them. So I'm going to go all the way to the closed mic, the far mic. Really dramatic difference between them. And then we mix those 2 things together. So this is literally microphone placement, as you would imagine in a concert hall. And all of those options are also available in the orchestral brass. The difference between chamber and orchestral is that the chamber options are single instrument, as indicated by that single icon, whereas the orchestral brass section tells you that you're listening to an ensemble. Close and far. Just to finish off our examination of the left-hand side of this panel, we've got a fine control as well. It's best if I bring in a second sound in order to demonstrate this. So I'm just going to create a little bit of fine-tuning offset between parts 1 and 2. So that's way too much. Just a little bit adds that extra kind of harmonic tension. Bring it back down to 0 again by double clicking. Now jumping across to the right hand side of these controls, don't forget for each of these parts, everything that you see in this lower window is dealing with either part 1 or part 2. When I jump between these 2 different sounds, you can see the release in this particular case is different between the parts, but for each one that I select, I'm editing the entire sound. It looks like these are on the left-hand side and these are on the right-hand side, but that's not the case. They're all common to the currently selected part. So back to part number 1, let's have a look at the envelope. This shape here describes the amplitude envelope of the sound. So we have an attack phase. This is how long it's going to take to get to maximum volume. So I'm just going to turn off part number 2 so that we can hear part number 1 really clearly. You can move this dynamically in real time, and it will automatically adjust itself. It's always going to get to maximum volume. See this node here, that's the top of the attack node, and it's always at maximum volume. If I pick that node up and try to drag it down with my mouse, you can see that I can't. So we are fixed at 100% at the end of the attack phase in terms of our volume, our amplitude, but we can control the shape of the curve that we use to get there. So that's what attack curve does. So let's create an exponential attack. So it starts off really, really slowly and is almost imperceptible. And then as it gets louder, it's going to get ever increasingly loud. Nice for swell effects. So all I did to change that curve was click in the curve box. You can see the little arrows and drag up and down with my mouse. In addition to picking up the node itself and dragging that forwards and backwards, I can do exactly the same with the attack knob. They do the same function. Once we've reached the end of the attack phase, we enter the decay phase indicated by this second line. This is how long we take to get down to the sustain point. This that I'm currently hovering over, that's the node that represents the sustain point, and the decay is how long we're going to take to get there. So attack phase, decay phase, and then we stop at the sustain node. The sound is currently right here. When I let the sound go, we're going to enter the release phase. We have options for our release curve. At the moment it's natural, but if I change to synthetic, I'll try to get to a stage where we can hear this clearly. So there's a synthetic release. Let's do it again. And now we'll have a listen to the natural release. So that's what the instrument actually sounds like in real life. Even though we have a single knob controlling the effect, the times are different. So for natural release, you can see the furthest I can go to is 3 seconds. Because when somebody stops playing a brass instrument, it happens pretty dramatically. If I switch back to synthetic mode, we can go all the way up to 20 seconds. There's no trombone in the world that sounds like that as it's releasing. But that doesn't mean to say it can't be used for good effect. As I said earlier, this is the sustain control. If I move that up and down, you can see me changing the sustain knob underneath. In fact, all of these controls are intrinsically linked. It's just nice when you're editing envelopes to do it in a graphical interface, so you get the option to do either. We've also got a decay curve, which looks just like the attack curve does. Now we can link the decay and release together. If I press this little link button, you can see 2 link buttons in the interface. Basically, they're the same thing. No matter which one I click, the other one is going to get engaged or disengaged. When I link the decay to the release knob is disabled. It's not doing anything anymore. And now we control both the decay and the release phase from a single knob. So as I pull this one backwards, you can see the ratios of those 2 controls are moving sympathetically. You can also see that the release phase is now linear. So here's me stuck on the release, on the sustain point, let the key go, and now we've entered the release phase, and we decay down at the same speed, we release at the same speed as we did during the decay phase. Again, this is a very artificial setting, but that's not to say it's not useful. It's just depending on whether or not you want to genuinely try to emulate a human being with this stuff. Now that entire envelope can then be multiplied or divided by this factor. So watch the attack curve. Now if I increase the time multiplier, it travels much more slowly. In fact, the entire envelope is just being multiplied by 5.9. Whatever the values were previously, this is going to take forever to release. All of them have been increased by 5.9. If I pull this below 0, then the entire envelope is going to speed up. So this will be very fast. There we go. Double click it and we set back to the default value. Double clicking in Arturia products resets them to a default value, not necessarily 0 or 100. It's going to be whatever's sensible for that control. And for the time multiplier, it's 1. Finally, we've got the velocity into time function. This alters the speed of the attack phase depending on how hard you hit the key. So at the moment, we have none of this function. So it doesn't matter whether I press a really quiet note or a really loud note, the attack phase runs at the same speed. If I now introduce some velocity sensitivity, about 3/4 is generally a good place to start. First I'll press a very quiet note. The attack phase is going very, very slowly. Now I'll press the same note harder, and as hard as I can. So the harder you hit the key, the faster the attack will go, and this is the ratio by which that effect is accomplished. So as quiet as I can, still really slow, as fast as I can. That's as fast as it can go within the constraints of this currently set attack value. And this is really nice for introducing a natural feel to your playing. When you play quieter, you generally do take longer to get to a place, you know, your attack swells are longer, everything breathes more. Whereas when you really want to kind of go for it, everything suddenly gets much sharper, the attacks get much shorter. So this is a really good way again to emulate that kind of human effect. Let's bring the galactic flight back in, and I'll just bring my attack envelope back a little bit. So that's both of those notes playing simultaneously, both of those parts playing simultaneously. Now let's pan them. We'll send part 1 all the way hard left, part 2 hard right. And now if we introduce the 5 semitone keyboard offset, we're back into Ben-Hur mode. And that's the sampler engine done. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Please hit like if you did. I'll see you next time. Thanks very much.